Gladiator Battle Tanks. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and war gear of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. And if you wish to see the channel flourish and possibly take on bigger topics and get better resources, then like and subscribe. But also consider joining our Patreon, links in the description, or throwing a one-off tip in the form of a super thanks, if I have earned your bounty. But first, let us all smile at the news that heralds a time for rejoicing. If you have not seen the short from Secret Level, I advise you to go have a quick look. It really does have some of the most epic action and amazing depictions of the Marines that I have ever had the fortune to witness. More of this will be a good thing. Links will be in the video description, of course. We also have the news that the universe of Warhammer 40k will be brought to the big and small screens in partnership with Amazon. Of course I have my trepidations, but this is not a time for pearl clutching. Let us just enjoy the moment and the dream that some of our most cherished stories may well get the full motion picture treatment. Good times may well be ahead. But let's push on to the main point of this War Gear Wednesday entry. And today, we delve into one of the newest pieces of war gear in the setting. Usually, this would be a simple statement for any other fandom, but in this particular setting, it is an earth-shattering occurrence, for it means that the entire character of the universe has irrevocably altered. But I shall wax lyrical about that later in the video. Now, let us begin in earnest. For today, we shall be looking at the Gladiator Battle tanks of the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's own Angels of Death, his Space Marines. And as usual, this video will follow a simple format. A wee tale to get you in the mood and show, not just tell, of the import of these weapons. Then we shall get to the lore discussion and breakdown. So let's have at it. From the Bald Library, 3 is a magic number. The soulless legions had come to our world. We had held out for as long as we could, constantly withdrawing before them. We had no choice. If we did not, we'd have nothing left to face them here now. These horrific Xenos raiders were no raiders at all. We thought this would be the usual. Come in fast, destroy and steal as much as they could. Then when the Navy appeared, they would run. But this did not happen. They were not here to raid and run. They were here to utterly annihilate us, every last human on the planet. Because they told us this. They gave us 24 hours to leave their world. Of course, this was impossible. But then, so were the Xenos. They were impossible. Everything about them was impossible. Their metallic bodies, their uncaring eyes, the way they would be blown to pieces, then simply get up again. We could knock them over easily enough, but they never ever stayed down. Their small arms could tear a man to pieces. It was like they fell apart. But even our heavy armour, our Lehman Russes, their line infantry could strip the protective layers from them. With enough of the Xenos concentrating their fire, they could strip the walls from a tank or building. Nothing and no one was safe from their green rays of death. They forced us back time and again. So, without choice, we withdrew to the city. 10 miles of buildings, alleys, rubble, and craters. Here is where we would stop them, or so I prayed to the Emperor. But in reality, we lost half of this entire city in one day. 1. Their phalanxes of marching metal legions we could bring down, could slow them, if not outright eviscerate them. But they all got up again. Even so, we were holding them for a time. Then they upped the stakes. Deadly dark sickle-shaped fighters tore through the air, strafing our lines, to then be replaced by their own version of sky bikes in large packs, hunting our lines for weaknesses, coming down on any outside of cover, and wiping them out. Their bug things came at us in waves, erupting out of the ground and streaming over bunkers, consuming everyone inside. Few weapons could halt such an avalanche. Flamers worked at points, but they were few and far between. But it was their huge spider things that really made the difference. At the head of every new phalanx of their warriors was now one of these scuttling terrors. It was massive, larger than a dreadnought, but with heat rays that swept the battlefield, and anyone struck by them burst into flames. Anything else was melted. Anything. With these monsters at the front of their lines, reflecting fire off their strange Xenos constructs, we could not get to the columns of metal men behind, and they pushed into the city in a dozen directions. We could not stop them. The Soulless had come for our world. Yet, this was when we received the glorious news. The Emperor, he had deemed us worthy. He had sent his angels of death to save us. The roar that came from my men was the most honest thing I had heard in days, since this had all began. But I was reserved. I knew that there were only so many angels in any chapter, and this, where we were, it was a backwater city, hardly worth fighting over in comparison to the hive cities and manufactorums. So I was more surprised than anyone there when the comms officer practically leapt from his station in adulation. They were not ignoring our plight, even out here. They had sent support. The roar of adulation died in the throats of my underlings as the scanners came back with the exact number of our supposed saviors. They had sent 3 vehicles to help. Only 3. And these were not land raiders filled to the brim with Astartes. These were not repulsors, likewise packed with Primaris Marines. Scanners stated that they were 3 support vehicles. Light transports, perhaps. I stood up and straightened my uniform, picked off pieces of lint. I was fully expecting the 3 vehicles to speed towards my command hub. I fully expected them to come out and instruct me on how to best deploy my battered men, or tell me to keep the faith, then move on to their real target. Yet, as we watched, they sent identification symbols and requested permission to engage the enemy. They did not stop at my command HQ. They sped straight towards the front. I ordered agreement for them to engage to be sent, then sat down again, watching the drama unfold. We had links to many picked capture devices all over the city. We followed them as best we could, and they were amazing. They did not touch the ground, and this made them seem fleet indeed, for they turned corners as if in fighters, swept across the city streets like apparitions. All hollow displays and scans were then linked to the Marines' vehicles, and they went to work. They did not barrel into their enemy like madmen. They were like surgeons, and this was their operating theatre. The first the enemy knew of their arrival was when one of the gladiators turned a corner and punched out 3 shots from its main battle cannon as it swept across the road and back into cover. With each shot, one of the huge spider things exploded. Well, the first 2 shots did this. The 3rd shot always seemed to hit the last target in a leg, tearing one of them off. and it dawned on me when this happened twice more. The third shot was designed to cripple, not to kill. In this way, the enemy could not fire back at them, as the third damaged Xenos monster struggled and fell. It gave the tank that couple of seconds of grace to make it back into cover. Fast-moving Xenos flying things darted off after the Gladiator, but as they turned a corner to get it into line of sight, one of the other Gladiators was sat in wait. It opened up with a totally different type of weapon, a huge gun with rotating barrels that shot unfathomable amounts of bolts into the hunting Xenos. It tore them to pieces, one and all, then swung about and repositioned. With the lead Xenos heavy assets burning, the phalanxes of infantry behind were now Grok's dung. My men raised out of their hidden defences and poured fire into the blocks of silvered scum. And they did this again and again. But it was the last one, the third Gladiator, that did the unthinkable, the impossible. The Marines had crushed so many of the Xenos that they threw their toys out and went for one almighty push. At the fore of this thrust was a strange, floating monolithic block of metal with weapons on it. My men tried their best, but even our rare plasma weapons bounced clean off the monstrosity as it loomed over our lines, slowly pushing forward. Then, that third Gladiator came out of nowhere, punching straight through the side of a building, and it ended a handful of yards away from the beast. Then, the Gladiator unloaded everything it had into it. And merciful Emperor, I could scarce believe. The lasers from its turret tore into the outer defences of the monolith. Then the melters on the side of the Gladiator fired off again and again, each ball of power smashing into the Xenos thing. And, by all that is holy, within 3 seconds, the Xenos behemoth, it was gone. The Gladiator fired into the lines of troops behind, then twisted on the spot and darted off in another direction. Over the next 4 hours, I watched as the 3 tanks, just 3 of them, tore the enemy to pieces. At dusk, the Xenos gave up the game and packed a hasty retreat. I have no idea what happened over the rest of our world, but if this battle was anything to go by, the Xenos will regret ever matching their might against the power of the Imperium. For in truth, the Emperor protects. The Gladiator Battle Tank is a one-for-one replacement of the Astartes Predator tank. The Space Marines are meant to be a totally autonomous and self-contained army. Hence, they cannot wait around for support or supplies, as other wings of the Imperial forces would need to do. For combined military formations are rare indeed. The Death Corps of Krieg, the Armageddon Steel Legion, and the many spiritual successors to the Cadian regiments are some of the few who are permitted to do this, to have access to many forms of weapon and equipment. It all comes back to the Horus Heresy. When a leader can command everything they need to conquer, then there is little to protect them from the whispers of hubris, of ego. To imagine that they could be a new emperor, could overthrow the powers that be. Hence, under the order of Rabute Gilliman, the armies and navies of the Imperium were separated, but also regiments of armour were always to be commanded by officers who did not have control of infantry and artillery as well. Of course there are exceptions, when a war master or other grandiose officer is given command of a crusade, but they are the exceptions that prove the rule. The only real oddity and exception is the Space Marines. They are able to deploy every form of weapon they require, when they require it, as they have total control of their own war gear, even to the extent of making a lot of it themselves in their own fortress monasteries. Not everything, mind you, for some things are so complex and precise that they can only be built by the cult mechanicus of Mars, in the forge worlds that dot the Imperium. But even so, the Marines are one of the few, and the Gladiator tank is a much-needed resource, for they provide the exact amount of firepower at the precise moment it is needed, wherever on the battlefield it is required. The Gladiator itself is based on the Impulsor chassis, which is an armoured personnel carrier, much in the same way that the Predator tank is based on the old Rhino chassis. Now, the Impulsor, like the Rhino, is actually a small unit transport. They are not as Goliath nor as heavily armed and armoured as the Repulsor, which is the Primaris Marines equivalent to the Land Raider. Well, sort of. Like all Primaris tanks, the Gladiator has the usual feature, which is the ability to hover. Now, this is not like the anti-gravity skimmers of the Eldari of any stripe. They cannot fly into the air, nor be dropped from high orbit. They do not actually fly. They push themselves from the ground with a system akin to that used by the land speeder. The anti-gravity engines are not powerful enough for anything more than hovering, and this can seem a bit of a letdown. When one hears of a floating tank, one immediately thinks of them taking off into the skies, no? Well, I did at the least. It must be known that these vehicles still gain significant advantage from this method of propulsion, for they cannot be stopped by traps and the equivalent of mines, for the explosions that come from their triggering are then forced downwards by the same power that forces the tank into the air. Nor can they be stopped by water, mud, quicksand, or even lava, for they float above all of these obstacles, and this means that their ability to turn on the spot and sweep past enemy defences are a shock to any who would confront them. This makes them nimble, astonishingly adaptable to near any environment, and with a set of surprises that give them overarching strategic and tactical advantages over any previously deployed Astartes vehicle. Oh, they are not Land Raiders, that is for certain, but they were never meant to be either. The Gladiator tank is thus smaller than many large-scale transports or usual war gear, and this too gives it an advantage, for it can go into so many more positions than most other tanks. The armour of a Gladiator is very substantial for its size. Improved upon by Archmagos Belisarius Call, the defences of a Gladiator are more than on a par with anything presently fielded by the Imperium. The Gladiator itself has 3 main marks, 3 distinct weapon loadouts, and thus 3 different uses. The first is the Gladiator Reaper. This beast fields a twin-linked heavy onslaught Gatling cannon as its main weapon, as also sported on the Redemptor Dreadnought. It throws out a stream of fire so concentrated and overwhelming they can evaporate entire columns of troops. With its Tempest bolters, auto launchers, and iron hail heavy stubber for close encounters, this monster can issue a tsunami of anti-infantry firepower. It can also be fitted with an Icarus rocket pod for defending against strafing runs from aerial enemies. This, the Gladiator Reaper, is a weapon that can shatter an advancing line or lay down such suppressing fire that no one will be putting their head over the parapet to defend themselves, all while the close quarters experts in the chapter get as close as they wish to enemy lines before initiating their charges. The bane of orc mobs and Necron columns, the Reaper does exactly what it says on the tin. In the Emperor's name, it reaps. The Gladiator Valiant is the next up. Where the Reaper is designed to counter infantry, the Valiant was forged to get in close and duke it out with medium to heavy assets. For the Valiant has twin-linked las talons. Able to punch through the toughest armour or bunker walls, it can level near anything. But that is not all. For it has, praise be to the Emperor, a pair of multi-melters. Melty. Placed on either side of the body of the Valiant, these can carve through or simply melt most adversaries, but they require to be in exceptionally close range. This gladiator is designed to shout, "I'm Spartacus!" then dive into the very thickest hairballs on the battlefield, and bring point-blank range extermination to anything the commanding officers believe should no longer exist. Sporting the same auto-launchers, Iron Hail Stubber and Icarus rocket pod, it is no slouch even against quickly closing infantry. A pugilist and paragon, the Valiant is named for the heart and courage of the men who drive them. For put simply, it is a Kingslayer. And last, but by no means least, the Gladiator Lancer. Now this one is, at the time of this video, all the rage. And I can see why, as I have one myself. Oh yes, I do. The Gladiator Lancer is the equivalent of the Predator Annihilator, for it has the usual stuff, the Iron Hail Stubber, Storm Bolters and Frag Storm Launchers, etc. But its main turret weapon is the deadly Lancer Laser Destroyer. Previously seen on the massive Lord of War, the Fellblade, this miniaturized laser cannon can punch through the strongest armor, collapse shields, and break bunker walls. The Lancer is used to skirt the battlefield and nip into range and delete enemy heavy assets. Larger tanks, Lords of War, Knights and, even at a push, Titans, can be pierced by the deadly light of the Lancer. For this duty, it has the Aquilon optic systems that are vastly superior to usual equipment. No enemy armor can avoid the gaze of the Lancer. And like a sniper, it will duck behind cover and wait for the mammoth enemy to be out in the open. Then it hovers around a corner after many miles away and punches out the target with one shot before retreating back into cover again. The surprise and rage this induces in many an enemy general is worth its weight in auramite. For a confused or enraged general is often the most incompetent. With all three variants available to the new Primaris chapters, and those who have accepted the reinforcements from Core, which is the vast majority now, the Space Marines are able to perform their role more effectively than ever before. Now, I did kick off this video stating that the very character of the grim darkness of the far future has irrevocably altered. And for my part, this is not hyperbole. Gone are the days of the slow, suffocating collapse of the human empire, the Imperium of mankind. With the return of the Primarchs to lead, and the advent of Belisarius Cawl and all of his many inventions, the entire flavour of Warhammer is altering. Whether this is for good or evil, I shall let you decide. For none can stand against the eternal march of time, but nor can any predict what simple consecutive changes will do to the identity of the whole. And some might say that sometimes the baby does indeed get thrown out with the bathwater. As usual, only time will tell. But it is a fundamental change to this universe. For it means one thing has begun to creep back into the Imperium of mankind. They have Primarchs returning, the Avenging Sun, Lord and Father of the 13th Legion, Ultramarines, Rebute Gilliman, and one of the most powerful generals of the Great Crusade, a Primarch beyond compare, the Lord of the 1st Legion, the Lion, L. Johnson. The return of the Primarchs heralds many things, but all of these are in universe ramifications, and there is more to it than that. The change really comes from the actions of that Magos Belisarius Cawl, for he has utterly disregarded the blanket ban on invention and advancement. He has tinkered and tested, forged and adjusted. He has taken the first steps on the road back to the golden age of technology. And this is a change that is the most important to the entire premise of the setting, for it means that the slowly decaying Imperium is no longer that. Decaying. It was the total lack of technological progress that permitted the setting to exist in its present form, so static for so long. And I think this is a genie that many will eventually wish had never been released, for there will be no way to put it back in the bottle. Change is true for stories, but is often the death knell for settings, because if you are enamored with something, you often do not want it to change. Though many will believe that this progress is a much-needed element and counters some of the confusion that many fans could never compromise. Why on earth was technology stuck for so long? The thing that many are missing is that eventually, be it a year or a decade, or multiple, by the logic presented at play in the setting, Core will have to bring out newer and even more deadly weapons sometime, and sometime soon. For settings are static, but stories require stimulus and change. The shift from Warhammer 40k being a setting into a story is something that many may well come to rue. For eventually, inevitably, inexorably, every story must have its final act. There must be a punchline to the entire event, a point to it all. So one day, unlike the Song of Fire and Ice, the grim darkness of the far future must end. And, as a ghoul, I am not so certain that that is a good thing. Again, only time will tell. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Like and subscribe, etc., etc. And tip with a super thanks if you think I have earned your bounty this day. But most importantly of all, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.